You are the greatest featherweight of all time.
He has beaten every man they put in front of him for the last decade.
You have a 10-year undefeated championship reign.
He terrorized the 145-pound division for years.
It's so fast, dude.
Oh, man.
And it is all over!
With 12 title wins. You are a UFC Hall of Famer.
The most spectacular 145-pounders that's ever walked the face of the planet.
But by the end of this video, we'll answer the question, what happens when it all ends?
José Aldo, relaxed and smiling.
But every end has a beginning. It starts with a dream. It always starts with a dream. It's 1986, and a child's face is burning.
When he was a little baby, his mother put him in a little baby cart, and his brothers and sisters were playing, and he bumped into it.
And she hit the grill with him, face first onto the grill.
Ele disse que a culpa foi minha, que eu que joguei ele. Eu disse, cara, eu vou te falar, tu era bebê, eu era criança, como é que eu vou lembrar que eu te joguei e aconteceu isso no teu rosto?
They called him Scarface, but his real name was José Aldo Jr., and his life was not easy.
Minha infância foi em Manaus, Amazonas, capital do estado, e minha infância.
A finger of grey stone jutting from the dense greenery of the Amazon rainforest, José lived in a small village in the forest itself, miles from the city.
Infância pobre, né? De origem humilde. E minha infância foi na rua, jogando bola. Até quando eu entrei pra luta. Onde que eu tinha um sonho de ser jogador de futebol, né? Então, só via jogando futebol de manhã, tarde e noite, ia pro colégio, voltava.
It's a story we hear a million times over, those kids Brazil over, dreaming a collective dream of escaping poverty through success in soccer. But when a whole nation is seeking the same escape plan as you, it becomes essentially impossible to find success.
Mas pela violência que eu tava jogando, né? Eu acho que eu tava esquecendo um pouco mal, eu acho que de jogar futebol, eu esqueci um pouco do sonho. Então, tava batendo mais do que jogando. Então, acho que ele viu, ele falou, fazendo um salto, tocando um berimbau, e um rapaz namorava em frente da minha casa com a menina e era instrutor de jiu-jitsu.
Quickly he began winning local tournaments and climbing the belt system. He was truly incredible at the sport, and so for the next few years, he trained. At the age of 15, José had proven his worth in the sport, and so there was only one natural forward step to take. A world tournament for under-18s was taking place in Rio de Janeiro later in the year, and he also wanted to compete, prove his mettle against all the other kids chasing the same dream as him. José told his mother that he wanted to see the sea for the first time, to see the hustle and bustle of one of the biggest cities in the world. His talent in jiu-jitsu was clear for all to see, but now he had to take the risk in order to create a life greater than the struggles that lay in wait for him in the small village. Winning the tournament would open many doors. His mother said that he was a dreamer, and nothing could be closer to the truth. Luckily, José would find funding from the government to pay for his flight out there, over 2,500 miles. José travelled just a month later. He would be dashed by the salt-laden air as he stood on a beach for the first time in his life. With butterflies in his stomach, the tournament loomed just the next day. This was all surreal for a boy who had ever known poverty in the jungles of the Amazon. The next day, Aldo would claim second place in the tournament, and with it, gain the attention of many top teachers of the sport Brazil over. Over the next 2 years, Aldo continued to climb the ranks of the jiu-jitsu scene, and had even secured his brown belt, but Aldo wanted more. With little more than a dream in his clothes, Aldo left for Rio de Janeiro again, leaving behind all he had ever known in pursuit of something no 17-year-old could truly understand or comprehend. But some force, some power, was propelling him forward, deep into the unknown.
Consegui o dia da passagem, comprei a passagem. Me lembro até hoje, eu fui a pé do Santos Dumont.
Within a year, a new sport had found him, and he was all in. MMA had sunk its teeth into him.
Vitória de Luciano! Bantamweight! 繰り返してローケットハウス！これもどうでしょうか？この傷では。Aí Marcel Luiz! However, he's very accomplished amateur fighter. Some hard leg going in there from Aldo. And young slipping.
In a little over a year, José would go on a rampage, his record totaling 7-1. Impressive to say the least, but 8 fights in 1 year and 2 months is just simply insane. And the best bit of it all, every single victory was a finish, knockout, or a submission, all in the first round. You simply could not dream of a better introduction to the sport, and the loss? Well, to be honest, it was a nothing burger. Right at the end of back-to-back fights, Aldo would move up a weight class to lightweight and unfortunately punch above his weight, getting submitted in the second round. But that loss early in his career only served as a catalyst for greatness. Still undefeated as a featherweight, he returned to his more natural division and went on a warpath. 2 wins against some tough opponents on the regional scene, and then finally, a fantastic opportunity to compete overseas in Pancrase against a Japanese prospect. The 3 wins in a row, and 10-1 in total, meant that he was now scouted by the big dogs. The WEC came knocking. In many ways, the organization is one of the most revered and nostalgic homes of combat competition in the history of MMA. If you ask many early MMA fans what some of their favorite fights were, then they would be pointing directly at the WEC to provide answers. The UFC had purchased them back in 2006, and they would go on to act as a sort of sister company that held smaller weight divisions, featherweight and below. Even in 2007, the UFC was yet to expand its roster below 155 pounds. Owing to the fact that all its fighters were smaller, even the cage that the practitioners fought in was smaller, sitting at 25 feet. The WEC was responsible for making a name for many of the stars that would become household names in the UFC. For featherweight and bantamweight, many consider it the lineal and historic legacy of the UFC divisions themselves. That is why when fighters are introduced in the UFC to this day, former champions of the WEC are still given their former prestige by Bruce Buffer in their introductions, and so many might consider Cole Escovedo the true lineal featherweight champion of the world, a man who would defend the featherweight title once in the WEC before being bested by the California Kid, a man that we will get to know shortly. But for now, we continue with José's journey through the organization. Back in June of 2008, when José Aldo first stepped into the WEC cage, he wasn't exactly blowing the ceiling off the arena. He was just another grey man amidst the others pining for notoriety in the sport. The WEC chucked Aldo a carcass to gain a highlight reel off of. His opponent was a washed and rather weathered MMA vet that had tiptoed into the sport all the way back in 1998. He had been the Shooto lightweight champion for some time, but it wasn't exactly against the greatest competition. Case in point, every time he stepped into the organization, he would get slapped about, and that's exactly what José did, knocking him out halfway through the second round. He did so whilst competing on the same card as then featherweight champion Uriah Faber. Their paths would cross surely soon, but there were still questions to be answered by the top dogs in the WEC, and he was about to put them all on notice.
That's it. Oh, look at that knee from these men. Will only get a shot of the
Aldo in just a calendar year would string together 4 more knockouts, including the fastest knockout in WEC history when he flying kneed Cub Swanson into the next decade in just 8 seconds, a knockout that is still discussed with admiration to this day. These just simply emphatic performances made him a must-see for WEC fans, and in a very short time indeed, Aldo went from a nobody in the favelas to earning a world title shot in one of the best promotions the sport could offer. Whilst José probably imagined that he would be facing the man that was top billed on the card of his WEC debut, the reality was much different. Uriah, just a year previously, had lost his featherweight title to the man that José now had to face, Mike Brown. Hailing from Portland, Maine, he wrestled his way through high school and college, building a solid foundation, eventually turning pro in MMA in 2001. Brown debuted in the WEC in June of 2008, after going 18-4 in his 6-year-long career. He would outclass Jeff Curran with his wrestling-heavy ground-and-pound approach to earn a unanimous decision. That win earned him a shot at Uriah Faber's featherweight title at WEC 36 in November. Against the odds, Brown stunned the division's poster boy, catching Faber with a sharp uppercut and finishing him with a first-round TKO to claim the belt. He defended it twice, first smashing Leonard Garcia with a first-round arm triangle choke at WEC 39, then outclassing Faber in their second fight in a 5-round war at WEC 41. Now riding a 10-fight win streak, Brown was a powerhouse, and many people felt that he had far too much experience for the Brazilian in Aldo. He had the grit and skills to shut down this young, hungry up-and-comer, and even if Aldo could win, it was going to require the mustering of everything Scarface had to offer. But yet again, Aldo did what he had always done at featherweight, win. A massive upset, stringing together his 6th finish in the WEC in a row, Mike Brown laid out as a new man was crowned the WEC champion of the world. José Aldo had done it, but crowning moments don't last long. There is always what is next, and Aldo was now no longer chasing the title, he was now the defender of it, and so he was quickly thrusted into his first bout as a champion. For the longest time, the WEC featherweight division had belonged to one man who had not only made the division what it was, but actually the sport in general. Uriah Faber, at a very young age, and at a very early point in his career, had become a legend, a household name, and was essentially the poster boy of the WEC. Case in point, almost 15 years later and organizations are still trying to use his name to sell their events. Uriah was the second man ever to call himself the featherweight champion of the world, and he would go on to defend it 5 times against some of the best the sporting world would ever know, the likes of Bantamweight GOAT Dominic Cruz and UFC Hall of Famer and lightweight world champion Jens Pulver. Uriah was marketable and charismatic, and many would hail him as the man that put the featherweights on the map, and was single-handedly creating a craze for the lighter divisions, and it was no wonder that for José's first defense as the WEC king, that he would be taking on this man. It was the perfect matchup. Either they would get their pretty boy back on top, or José would legitimize himself off of Uriah's name value. To prove just how big of a star Uriah was, their fight would be the headline of the event, even though Benson Henderson and Donald Cerrone were fighting for the lightweight title in the co-main event, going completely against tradition where champions are stacked in order of lightest first to heaviest last. It was the only time in the history of the WEC that an event would be a pay-per-view as well, eventually selling 175,000 pay-per-view buys.
These guys are the pioneers of the lightweight division, and these guys deserve to be on pay-per-view. This card deserves to be on pay-per-view, and if you're a fight fan, you're going to be buying it on Saturday night. Fuckers better buy this shit. You've been working hard.
I'm fighting for a world title, so it doesn't get any better than that.
I love a guy that has goals like that. That wants to become the best ever, wants to leave a legacy. I want to be the first guy to win belts in 3 different weight classes. Yeah, I want to fight Uriah Faber in Sacramento. I want to beat him in his own house. I love guys like that.
We're going to fight our hearts out. I mean, we're going to be going for the kill. As far as excitement goes, I think you're looking at 2 of the most exciting guys on the planet. To have us fight each other, it's going to be crazy.
Aldo's strategy was clear from the opening bell. Target and destroy Faber's lead leg.
That's the worst pain I've ever been through.
It literally felt like a bat was hitting my leg. That changed the game for me in that fight. I literally was, hobbling after the 3rd round.
Just look up Uriah's leg and you'll see some just disgusting pictures. Looks like a dead body.
Yeah, it looks horrible.
It was black and blue from my hip to my ankle, and it took about a month and a half to recover, and just thinking about it can get my leg tingling.
By the fight's end, Faber was limping, unable to mount a significant offense, his leg mangled over the course of a brutal 25 minutes. On top of this, José picked Uriah apart with jabs and shots to the body, and even took him to the ground and roughed him up there for a little too. It was just a complete shutout, and there was nothing that Faber, the once featherweight great, could do to turn the fight to his favor. Admittedly, I started watching the UFC back at UFC 200, and dabbled around the time that Conor became a star. Call me a casual all you want for that, but I have a distinct memory of this sport trying to cinch its hooks into me. Back around the time that this fight first happened, my big brother shoved a laptop in front of my face, presumably as I was in the midst of a Fallout 3 session, showing me a video of a bum-chin retired skateboarder supported by crutches showing off his leg that had been turned into a Krabby Patty, and talked about how brutal of a fighter José was. Whilst it was gnarly to see, I quite frankly was more interested in putting Harold out of his misery, the poor barky bastard. But it's funny to look back and see how it was these moments that pulled people into the sport, or at least tried to, that is. José walked away with a unanimous decision victory, and secured the first defense of his title, and whilst it wasn't the most action-packed victory like his previous 6 finishes had been, it was certainly considered one of his most impressive. In José's second defense of the WEC Featherweight title, he would be taking on Manny Gambarian, but Jose would prove that there are levels to this game, knocking Manny out inside of the first 2 rounds, and once again declaring that he was indeed the greatest featherweight in the world. One amazing thing about this WEC event that really just encapsulates how popular this organization was at the time. On the channel Versus, the card would draw in just shy of 500,000 viewers. For context, an average UFC fight night, now almost 15 years later and billions of pounds of investments later, gets around the same amount of viewership. This was just some organization featuring the smaller guys, and yet Jose in the main event was still pulling in massive numbers. And so, well, the path that this story goes down next is pretty much expected, all things considered.
Ariel Helwani standing alongside the president of the UFC, Mr. Dana White. And Dana, thank you so much for the time today. I want to take you back to July. That's when I first heard a rumor that WEC was merging with the UFC. And since then, I've gathered a lot of information. Now I confidently present it to you and ask you the question. Is WEC merging with the UFC?
Yes.
When?
The last fight for the WEC will be in December.
October 28th, 2010, the merger begins. José Aldo is touted to become the UFC Featherweight Champion at some unknown time in the next couple weeks, and Dominic Cruz will face Scott Jorgensen at the final WEC event on December 16th that same year. The winner will claim the final WEC Bantamweight Championship, and at the exact same time have the inaugural UFC Bantamweight strap wrapped around their waist. The event would signal the finalization of 2 new weight classes joining the UFC, taking the total to 7 different weight limits, and its roster of fighters grew. It only made more sense to add more weight classes. For the featherweights, their final few fights in the organization were essentially meaningless. Their future only had one destination, and that was the UFC.
Just heard the news, the WEC and the UFC merger, and I'm stoked. This whole time it's been the same company. We're finally going to be under one banner, which means bigger opportunities.
The WEC had done all the work putting the smaller weight divisions on the map, but ultimately they would fade into the annals of history. Just another victim of the UFC monopoly, but its place in the archives of this sport cannot be understated. Uriah Faber and José Aldo had quickly become household names for any casual viewer and had rightly become the inspiration for smaller fighters across the globe. The UFC's aggressive growth had consumed Pride and Strikeforce, and presumably made any number of competition fade into obscurity. It's a shame that most fans of MMA won't ever remember the WEC for what it was, the organization that provided a platform to see the rise of Donald Cerrone, the Showtime Kick, the Korean Zombie, and Dominic Cruz's legendary pioneering run as a bantamweight king. In November of 2010, Jose was ushered onto the canvas of the UFC octagon at UFC 123. There, the WEC featherweight division fizzled from reality, and instead he was offered a UFC championship belt.
Alright guys, this is it. It's official. He is now UFC Featherweight Champion. Welcome to the UFC.
He was now promoted to the undisputed featherweight champion of the world. No fight marked the occasion, no victory brought in a new era. Instead, it was politics as always that crowned a new time for the sport. One of my favorite videos of Jose, and one that has always stuck with me when I think of this man, is this one. It's a video in which he buys his first ever suit in preparation of his ceremony of being honored with the UFC title. It's just a reminder of where this man had come from. Dirt poor in the favelas, nothing to his name, and now here he was, finally able to afford his first ever suit, and seeing how happy and meaningful it is to him is enough to put a smile on any man's face. As for the rest of the men of the WEC, well, time was running out for them. In December, a month later, the 53rd event would roll around in a final waltz. Dominic Cruz, the bantamweight champion of the world, would win his fight against Jorgensen and be crowned as the first and last of 2 different organizations. The WEC bowed out of the sport forever, left to fade into abstract memory as the UFC trudged onward towards supremacy. UFC 125 was just a month later, and was meant to serve as the platform in which the King of Rio would defend his throne for the very first time against Josh Crispy, but unfortunately, Aldo was pulled from the card due to a neck injury. Instead, Josh would go on to face late replacement Dustin Poirier, who was an underdog at the time, and would go on to beat the anticipated title challenger from bell to bell, pushing the diamond to the top of the pile at featherweight. He is a man that we will hear more from in the future, no doubt. It's great to look back in these retrospective videos and see exactly how these men's careers started in the UFC, and here is the future lightweight great Dustin Poirier entering the UFC as a late replacement, taking out an almost featherweight title challenger. What a crazy sport. Just over a month later, Dana White would announce in the wake of Josh's letdown performance that the winner of Mark Hominick and George Roop would find themselves becoming the first men to take on José Aldo in the first ever UFC featherweight title fight. Mark Hominick was a pioneer of the sport and had many years previously fought in the UFC lightweight division. After leaving the organization, he found his groove going down and competing as a featherweight. Most recently, he had strung together a 4-fight winning streak and pulled ahead of his WEC peers in terms of the rankings. The fight against Roop was essentially a setup by the UFC. Roop was a journeyman at best and was simply a punching bag for the UFC to get some highlight footage of Hominick kicking ass. And well, that is exactly what happened in the bout. Just a minute and a half into the competition between the pair, Hominick would knock the poor guy out and secure himself a contract to fight for the UFC Featherweight Championship. It was now time for Aldo to prove himself on the main stage and under the brightest lights the featherweight division had ever seen.
Mark the Machine Hominick from Chelmsford, Ontario, a mixed martial arts fighter that fights with the UFC. I have an upcoming fight April 30th at the Rogers Center, fighting for the featherweight, the 145-pound world title.
Not a lot of smack talking going on between Aldo and Hominick. We know Mark is a classy guy, and José Aldo can't even speak the language.
Acho que você cai e você tem que levantar. Eu acho que essa sim, eu acho que você tem que cair e levantar. Essa é o maior aprendizado que eu tenho, que várias vezes eu caí, todas as vezes eu levantei, sempre para brigar.
Jose, like he's won fights in 9 seconds, so he's definitely, as soon as that bell rings, you have to be ready for him. This is the inaugural 145-pound featherweight UFC belt, so this is the first time this belt's been on the line.
Hominick versus José Aldo, 55,000 tickets sold for this Saturday night.
I have a baby due the week after the fight. You know, like things are in line, and I really truly believe that, you know, things in life happen for a reason.
After a quick touch of gloves, Hominick went straight for Aldo like a bull in a china shop, but a flurry of punches courtesy of the champion soon put a stop to the man they call the Machine. The fight was a masterclass from Aldo. Punches, leg kicks, body shots, takedown defense. The champion showcased it all. Hominick's face over 25 minutes became distorted and broken by the never-ending assault. When it was all said and done, Aldo walked away defending the featherweight belt for the first time in the history of the sport. And what a win it was. A dominant and brutal unanimous decision, stamping his place atop the sport. Mark Hominick would never be the same fighter again. The Machine would go on to lose another 3 fights in a row, crushed by extreme talent that the featherweights had to offer. He fought for a world title in 2011, and by the end of 2012, Mark would never fight again, a footnote in Aldo's legacy. Just 3 months later, it was announced that Aldo had found his next challenger, Kenny Florian, who would be having his 3rd shot at UFC Gold, this time as a featherweight. And well, whilst many were surprised that those who had been battling it out in the division for years in the WEC were snubbed, Kenny Florian had kind of earned his shot by being one of the best lightweights the UFC had ever produced. It was also an interesting proposition that could offer the featherweights a little more validity. If Kenny went down a weight class and won the belt, well, now they had a tried and tested UFC vet with firm controls of the reins to lead the division into legitimacy. If Jose won, well, he was showing the world that the featherweights always belonged here because they were more than capable of destroying the best the premier organization had to offer in the form of a former UFC title challenger. The pair would serve as the co-main event of UFC 136, sitting under Frankie Edgar's 3rd defense of the UFC lightweight title. It was a fantastic opportunity for Jose to really cement his place and continue his legacy.
Ladies and gentlemen, after 5 rounds, we go to the judges' scorecards for a decision. All 3 judges score this contest 49, 46,
After 5 rounds, the judges' scorecards represented the dominance on display, 49-46 across the board, a unanimous decision for Aldo. The win stretched his streak to 14, solidifying his grip on the featherweight crown. The 35-year-old, larger and more experienced opponent was outclassed at every turn. José Aldo well and truly told the world the featherweights were here to stay, and Dana White couldn't have been happier. Kenny Florian, on the other hand, had just lost his 3rd shot at UFC Gold, a defeat that marked the end of his fighting career. He was yet another fighter nudged into retirement by the Brazilian great, but Florian's story didn't end there. He transitioned into a new role, becoming one of the most respected analysts in MMA. His voice grew into a prominent and valued presence in the sports media landscape. Whilst his achievements inside the cage were impressive, reaching a level few ever will, it's arguably his insights and knowledge as an analyst that have left the most lasting and positive impact on the world of mixed martial arts. Up next for Jose was an undefeated prospect on the rise. Chad had entered the WEC just a year before it had folded into the UFC as an undefeated fighter from California. Like most men who were small and muscly from California, he had naturally gravitated to Uriah Faber's up-and-coming squad of fierce hobbits, Team Alpha Male. He was one of their prospects, as I said, undefeated in the sport and a 2nd-place Division I NCAA wrestling medalist. In the WEC, he would put in the work, getting 4 wins, and then joining the UFC. From there, he would string together a further 2 wins against some of the best the division had to offer. Undefeated, 11-0, young and hungry, he represented everything the UFC wanted as their next challenger for the UFC title. With the name value of fighting under the tutelage of Uriah Faber, it really was the perfect storm to hype up a fight in the organization, and so the UFC pulled out all the stops. Could the student avenge his vanquished master, or could the dominant champion cling to his place at the top of the sport? Well, the wrestling-heavy ground-and-pound expert Mendez sought to challenge Jose in ways that he had never been. The date was set, UFC 142, January 2012.
UFC 142, the UFC returns to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and the UFC Featherweight Championship of the world will be defended by the champion, José Aldo, one of the very best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. And he takes on the undefeated Chad Money Mendez in an outstanding matchup of opposing styles.
Being as I'm a wrestler, I'm a ground guy, so, I think the blueprint's set, and I just got to train and, get in there and do what I got to do.
People have been waiting to see the old José Aldo from the WEC. This is his breakthrough fight. He's in his own country. He's fighting, defending his title. It's the first time he's ever, or that weight division has ever headlined a UFC event. It's a big deal for this guy.
Get in there and I'm going to put it to him, so I definitely hope he's not looking past me at all.
Seconds on the clock here in round 1. And Aldo's still trying really hard to separate those hands. He briefly does, but Mendez reconnects him and he's free. Oh! That's it! Trying to finish it! And it's all over!
Up until this point, Jose, a man who had finished most of his fights that he had ever been in his career, had yet to achieve a highlight reel-worthy moment for this promotion. That was until Chad Mendez, the man whose game plan was clear from the beginning, chain wrestle, and so he smothered Jose up against the cage for essentially the whole of the first round. Jose may have been grabbing the fence to shut down this tactic, which is naughty, but Chad showed little variation in his determination to get the fight off the feet. And so when space was created in the last seconds of the round after Jose shook Mendez off of him, Chad's next move was obvious, a level change, and it was there that he would eat a devastating knee courtesy of the Brazilian. But that wasn't the highlight was soon to follow. In his hometown, Aldo jumped the cage and jumped into his adoring fans, creating one of the best moments the sport has ever seen. Aldo and the crowd swarmed by his satiated, bloodthirsty fans, mobbed in their excitement. The security scrambling to save him as he is hoisted upon their shoulders in celebration. If it wasn't obvious, it was now. Jose was dearly loved by not only his hometown crowd, but UFC fans the world over, and he was finally afforded the opportunity to show those tuning in what he was capable of, highlight reel finishes. He had handed Chad his first defeat in unbelievable style, and with unbelievable ease. It's something Mendez would be haunted by for years to come in his career, laying in bed, reliving the moments his dreams was shattered upon the canvas. But his time would come again. That was destined. Aldo had now defended his title 3 times, something very few champions have ever achieved. He was looking unstoppable. Aldo's run through the featherweight division was undeniably dominant. I don't think there was a single moment where it looked like he was in trouble. Most media outlets at the time could only offer up criticism of his reign by suggesting that it was weight cuts or injuries that would ultimately be his undoing. But the UFC had something else in mind. It wasn't exactly champion versus champion, but it was as close as we were going to get. The UFC announced that Jose would be taking on recently dethroned former lightweight world champion Frankie Edgar, a man they thought could potentially beat down on Aldo. It was no secret that Edgar had been an underdog his whole career, a guy undersized for his division and always punching above his weight. But what he did not have in stature, he certainly had in heart. None so obvious when he dispatched UFC legend BJ Penn to win the lightweight throne, a belt that he would go on to defend 3 times, including Hall of Fame garnering performances against Gray Maynard. He had come undone through the hands of Benson Henderson twice in a row, and decided that dropping down to featherweight was the best course of action for his career, a weight class that he said he could easily make. But I don't think that he was expecting to be instantly taking on the champion in his debut of that weight class, yet here he was, about to stand across from a man many were calling the pound-for-pound athlete of the sport.
The judges score this contest 49-46. 49-46 and 48-47 for the winner, and still the undisputed UFC featherweight.
The fight wasn't anything particularly to write home about. Aldo was dominant early, winning the first 3 rounds, but it was Edgar who rallied in the final championship rounds, very characteristic of a man who made his mark on the sport by way of his grit and resolve. Edgar had arrived at featherweight with a bang, that's for sure, and left lingering desire to see him at the very least get himself a rematch, but he would have to ultimately prove himself against the top 5. Aldo had proved that those men coming from heavier weight classes was still no real match for him, and that there needed to be order re-established in the featherweight rankings, and so his next 2 title defenses would come in the form of ranked top 5 opponents, Chan Sung Jun, the man they called the Korean Zombie, and Ricardo Lamas. Together they presented the best the featherweights could offer at the time, but they fell one and the same. Chan Sung Jun would be knocked out in the 4th round after being outclassed for nigh on 20 minutes, and Ricardo Lamas would be picked apart and destroyed over the course of yet another dominant 25-minute unanimous decision.
Era sonho ser o campeão, então eu consegui. Agora eu tenho que manter isso por muito tempo ainda. Eu quero me dedicar cada dia, cada vez mais, como se fosse o último. Tenho muito ainda a fazer pela categoria, a fazer pelo esporte, a fazer pela minha carreira. Eu quero quebrar muitos recordes ainda que tem a ser quebrado, que eu quero ser campeão e continuar sendo campeão.
This extract from a media post just really highlights what people thought about Jose at the time. The 23-1 Aldo has won 13 consecutive Zuffa fights. That puts him just 3 short of Anderson Silva's company record. He's the 3rd longest reigning champion in Zuffa history, behind Silva and George St. Pierre. He's already defeated 4 of the 5 fighters ranked directly underneath him. Bottom line, it's time to start talking about Jose Aldo among the sport's all-time great champions. By the way, that quote was made before beating Ricardo Lamas, meaning it's 14 straight now, and now all of the top 5 contenders had been beat by him. He was greatness manifested. He was a sporting icon, the King of Rio, and there was seemingly no end to his reign. There were many fighters, like Chan Sung Jun, who would go on to become all-time greats, that were just footnotes in the bottom of this legend's reign. After clearing out the division, Aldo had little choice but to take on a man who had been on a warpath to earn his rematch against Aldo. Team Alpha Male standout Chad Mendes, since being destroyed by a knee courtesy of Aldo, would go on a 5-fight win streak, knocking out 4 of his opponents and destroying another over the course of 3 rounds in a dominant decision. His win streak included some of the best the featherweights had to offer, such as Clay Guida and Darren Elkins. It had been 2 long years since Aldo had stripped Mendes of his undefeated record, and the American wanted revenge, and now he had his date, October 25th at UFC 179, his chance for redemption. There was a lot of emotion going into the bout for Chad, and it was bubbling up to the surface.
You know, this is something that's made personal at this point, and you know, it's not about just the title, it's about redemption and payback. You know, this is my time. It's my time to be a king.
If you look back, and you include his WEC career, this is his 10th title fight in a row. That's an extraordinary run.
We're talking about one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time.
Amongst the top 2 or 3 pound-for-pound fighters in the world.
Agora, eu tenho que manter isso por muito tempo ainda. Eu acho que eu sou um cara novo, tenho muito ainda.
You know, he's actually my only loss on my record. All I can say is payback's a bitch.
This is the main event of the evening. From the sold-out Janelle. Here we go in Arena.
Mendez with the early leg kick.
Nice combination of Mendez again. That was the first time I've ever been dropped in a fight.
20 seconds on the clock. The Chad still hasn't recovered. Oh, wow, that was way after the buzzer. They go the distance in the rematch here at Rio de Janeiro.
And still, the undisputed UFC Featherweight Champion of the world, José Aldo.
When the dust settled and the scorecards were read, Aldo emerged the clear victor. Though all 3 judges gave Aldo 4 out of 5 rounds, the scorecards do not paint a complete picture. Mendez had put on a performance of a lifetime. Aldo's dominance over the division was pulled into question early. Mendez proclaimed war from the center of the octagon, and that is exactly what unfolded for the next 25 minutes. Ebbs and flows as victory and defeat swelled in both men's resolve. Blood and cuts and bruises were shed equally as both men pushed each other to a place that neither had ever been. It was a contest for a lifetime. José Aldo's and Chad Mendez's second clash of violence will be remembered for years to come, a fight placed into the featherweight history books. Whilst the fight gave fans something to adore and cherish for years to come, it in turn took something from those competitors that night. They crossed the threshold of the chain-linked fence, and when they returned, they left behind a piece of themselves, never to be found again, lost to the octagon forever. Whilst I would hate to foreshadow too much of what's yet to come, the fact is, both men would never be the same again. Mendez years later would reflect that the bout had taken years off of his life. Mendez and Aldo collided in what would be at the absolute peak of both of their careers. This sheer level of talent, heart and grit displayed that night is a testament of what this sport can produce. Greatness in victory and greatness in defeat, but greatness in combat comes with sacrifice, a fact often easily ignored in our bloodlust and yearning for violence. As fans, we got what we came for though, and Aldo remained the top featherweight in the world once again. His win streak extended to 18. The 19th man to be selected to try and solve the puzzle that is Aldo was an enigmatic Irishman on the rise. Fighting out of Dublin, Conor had been on a now overstated and over-reported blaze through the featherweight rankings. If you watch this sport, or have even heard the whispers of the term MMA, then this man is likely the first person you think of. For better or worse, Conor McGregor's ascension through the 145-pound division defined an era, all on a crash course for a humble man out of the favelas. To not bloat the length of this video anymore, I will spare you the rehashing of all his fights, of which had placed him in the top 5, and a shot at the reigning champion looking for his next contender. The UFC would spare no expense in trying to push their new superstar further into stardom, and so what would follow would be a world tour for the ages, and then over the course of 12 days, Aldo and McGregor would fly to 5 countries and 8 different cities to promote the fight, with Dana White admitting that it was the most amount of money that they had ever spent in advertising for a singular fight. And well, it was money well spent, because what would follow was one of the most entertaining press tours the world of MMA had ever seen.
Disrespected you that got you to dislike him.
This is not a therapy session.
Oh, no, but you are...
I heard a slap him in the back of the head. I didn't slap him in the back of the head. I put my hand on his neck and I bent him over.
Yo, dream.
You like it?
Yeah, dream.
It looks good, right?
No, never.
Say goodbye. Tell him I said I am his daddy.
Nunca vai ser.
Sit on my lap.
Nunca vai ser.
We want to know what Jose's pussy smells like. Jose, are you listening? Jose, he got me listening. McGregor's coming
Past the glimmering lights, the screaming crowds, the camera lenses, the men were locked behind their respective training room doors. A grueling camp would follow, months of training, with one goal in mind: victory. Aldo had admittedly come out of the other side of the press tour worse for wear, mocked and humiliated at many moments. There were visible signs for the first time that he was extremely frustrated and anxious to get into the cage and teach this mouthy European a lesson. This was Aldo's most important fight of his career by far, the whole weight of the world on his shoulders, quite literally more eyes than there ever had been in the sport tuning in to watch this event. That pressure must have been unimaginable for both men, but Jose had more to lose, and it was wrought on his face the entire press tour. It was getting to him. Unfortunately, 2 weeks before the bout was expected to take place, Aldo would pull out of the event citing a rib fracture as the result of a training incident. Rather famously, McGregor would find out early in the morning, and his reaction would be hailed by Dana White for years to come. That opponent, in which McGregor didn't care who it was, would end up being none other than Chad Mendes, who, after losing to Aldo the year previous in the fight of the year, or even decade, had gone on to knock out top contender Ricardo Lamas in the first round, cementing his place in the top 5 of the division. His return to the title picture wasn't exactly perfect. 2 weeks' notice, probably sitting on the sidelines eating elk and drinking beers, isn't the greatest of circumstances, but it wasn't like Chad had spent his off-season being fat and useless, and so if any man could step up on short notice for an interim title and put on a gutsy performance of a lifetime, it was Chad. And so that world title face-off between Aldo and McGregor that the UFC had put so much effort into promoting had fallen by the wayside, but people were still fixated by what McGregor could produce. The event, even with Chad, broke the Nevada Gate record, producing over 7.2 million in ticket sales, and the pay-per-view, whilst not what every fan wanted, almost sold 1 million streams. McGregor waltzed into fight week, taking in the empire that he had built, and now he had to fight for the interim title. For the first time in Aldo's career, there was direct contention for his legacy.
Chad Mendes now will fight Conor McGregor for the interim belt.
Jose Aldo backed out. He was going to fight you, backed out. He's been cleared to fight by a doctor. What do you think happened?
Me, I feel he is afraid. The doctors have cleared him to fight. It's a bruise, but the man is running scared. I cannot force him into the octagon to face me. So rightfully so, the belt should be taken from him, and we should contest for the interim belt.
Conor's ready to go. The #1 guy in the world, Chad Mendes, is ready to go.
My mind is absolutely bulletproof, solid as a rock. So if you are #1, who gives a shit if #2 steps out in place of #3? At the end of the day, I'm #1. Yeah, his facial structure will be rearranged after the fight.
I match up horrible for this guy. Conor, do you know what wrestling is?
I can rest my balls on your forehead.
I'm gonna kick you straight in the throat. I'm gonna kick you straight in the throat.
Alright, dude, you're so tough.
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen, for the UFC Interim Featherweight title. Introducing the notorious one, Conor McGregor.
His belly is gonna be breathing in, and his body is gonna be screaming for oxygen, and I'm gonna be still there in his face, cracking him with everything I have, every shot, the heel, the knee.
Look at the clock closely. 10 seconds. Could he finish him here? It's all over. Conor McGregor is the UFC Interim Featherweight Champion.
In just over 7 years, McGregor had gone from a man struggling to make ends meet on welfare, questioning whether he'd even be competing in the sport in the first place, to not only becoming one of the world's biggest superstars, but now also a world champion, the gold and leather wrapped gloriously around his waist. Whilst he hoisted the green and white orange Irish flag into the air, critics may have claimed that it was the worst McGregor had looked and that there were certainly chinks in his armour, but it was drowned out by the frenzy of not only Irish fans that made up 20% of the audience of the arena that night, but also pretty much every human slightly interested in MMA at the time. Everyone loved McGregor, and uncharacteristically of this most sludgy of fan bases, there was hardly a hater in sight. The night was Conor's, and he proved that he not only had skill, but he also had heart too. put to the test and still passed. The fight with Aldo was quickly rebooked. The bout needed to be capitalized on considering the prior promotion that they had done. And well, now it was even more exciting. McGregor was the interim champion, and he had just wrapped filming on one of the most successful seasons of The Ultimate Fighter in recent memory. People were excited, and the fight was booked for the end of the year, McGregor versus Aldo to headline the December pay-per-view. UFC 194 in 2015 was about to close off the year with a bang.
There's another thing. What do you want to be? You know, I don't want to be anything. I am everything I want to be. And I'm already there. You know? I don't want anything. You know? They're always gonna want. I always have the attitude that I have. And I always felt like I was a black belt walking in. You know what I mean? I always felt like I was the world champion. I always felt like I already could do everything.
UFC fans watching around the world have been waiting for. Live from the sold-out MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas.
Black trunks for the champion. Smiling. The new UFC Featherweight Champion of the world. Oh, unbelievable. Undisputed UFC Featherweight Champion of the world.
In 13 seconds, 10 years of dominance had come to a startling halt. It almost seemed unfair, but such is this sport. The highest highs juxtaposed with the lowest lows. Even Conor, in what must have been the greatest moment of his life, seemed almost sad that it had been over so quickly. Legends do not deserve to be finished like that. It showed the humility lurking below Conor's perceived arrogance. Jose was clearly broken by the moment, his head bowed, humiliated, distraught that he had even thrown a punch so wildly, and then paid the ultimate price for his overextension. 13 seconds, the fastest knockout in a title fight, the perfect cap for the man fighting out of Dublin. 13 seconds, the most imperfect end to an illustrious title reign. The crowd, like the millions watching at home, were naturally gobsmacked, sat in awe at what had just transpired. Jose left the octagon that night, beltless and ashamed, but even in defeat he was naturally hungry for a rematch, and felt that the fight itself was somewhat of an accident, a mistake. He should never have bit so readily at McGregor's jab. Jose felt more than confident that if the two were to rematch, that he would indeed win, but others were not so confident, and any talks of a rematch actually happening quickly dissipated. The UFC had other intentions that they were more eager to chase. They had a superstar that they wanted to milk for everything that they could offer. Conor would be linked to a double championship fight at UFC 196 against the reigning lightweight champion Rafael dos Nachos, the second time ever that two reigning champs had ever been set to face each other in the UFC. But that fight would fall apart, leading to Nate Diaz stepping in on short notice and providing an upset for the ages. This led into UFC 200, the biggest landmark event for the UFC since its inception. Initially, McGregor was touted to rematch Diaz at this event, but McGregor would get in his own way, which led to the UFC, desperate to fill their card with as many belts as humanly possible, falling to their usual tactic of an interim belt. José Aldo would be called upon to try and reclaim a strap, and the man standing across from him would be none other than Frankie Edgar. A rematch was on the books, the winner of which was promised a fight against the Irishman at the end of his lightweight escapade. In the fight, Aldo would go on to produce more of the same that he had the first time against the Jersey native, dominating him over the course of 5 rounds and cinching the interim featherweight title around his waist once more. What would follow would be one of the most confusing years in the history of the featherweight division, so let's break it down. Conor still reigned as the featherweight champion, whilst Aldo now sat with the interim belt. Conor would go on to beat Nate Diaz in a welterweight clash, and then a couple of events later, challenge Eddie Alvarez for the lightweight title in one of the greatest title fight performances of an age. McGregor would be declared as the first ever simultaneous double UFC champion, but it wouldn't last for long. Just 14 days later, the UFC would announce that McGregor was vacating the featherweight title due to inactivity in the division. The real reason? Well, UFC 206, the pay-per-view directly after the Eddie Alvarez and Conor McGregor fight, had lost its championship main event. The company scrambling to fill it with a belt saw an opportunity to strip McGregor of his featherweight title, promote Aldo to the undisputed champion, and then whack another featherweight interim title belt on the line for two other men, those two men being former lightweight champion Anthony Pettis and a Hawaiian on a hot streak, Max Blessed Holloway. It made absolutely zero sense. McGregor hadn't even been a champion for a year at that point, but was still stripped for inactivity. Aldo had been an interim champ for less than 6 months, and yet here he was, now the undisputed champion, and having an interim belt put up for grabs below him. It was a mess, a true political mess, all to put a championship fight on a headline of a pay-per-view. Aldo said of the matter, "I knew for certain that this would happen. In my opinion, I never stopped being the champion. I lost that fight because of an accident. I knew that I would win a rematch and would become champion again. It's not my fault that he is a coward. He was never the champion. I don't see myself losing to anyone in my weight class or any other one." Aldo danced on McGregor's grave, and then the man ranked 2 in the division, Max Holloway, on a remarkable 9-fight winning streak, including the likes of Cub Swanson, Charles Oliveira, and Jeremy Stevens, was awarded the chance for gold against Anthony Pettis, a man you might know from the Wheaties box, coming off of his pretty remarkable guillotine choke against Charles Oliveira in his featherweight debut. As far as matchups go, it was alright. Whilst most people could see through the marketing and political haze and see the fight for what it was, an excuse to wrap a belt around a fighter in the main event, if anyone deserved that opportunity though, it was Max. This was it. 6 years of competing in a sport, wins and losses, ups and downs, and this was finally the Hawaiian's opportunity to claim his spot in the history books.
As soon as you attach a title to a fight, people believe you're going to see something other than maybe what you were going to see before, and it has more meaning. Does this fight really have any more meaning?
One thing growing up, I believed in myself, no matter what. And I was telling everybody I'm going to be a UFC fighter, and every single one, people laughed. Every single one. Someone laughed,
This card has had many different changes to it, Dana. It was almost appropriate that the final day we had one more wrinkle in all of this with Anthony Pettis.
That fight has undergone a little bit of a change. It's still an interim featherweight championship fight for Max Holloway because he made weight. Anthony Pettis, however, weighed in at 148 pounds, which means if he wins on Saturday at UFC 206, the fight is still going to take place, but he will not be the interim champion.
I don't know if Pettis can make that weight. Pettis has made 46 before, but he's never actually made 45 that I know of. So it's a problem.
And this shit happens, The guy didn't get his job done. I feel bad for the guy, He had chance at history, but I'm glad that we still get the fight. Can't wait, man. I have nothing against Pettis, He tried.
It's time! 5 rounds for the interim UFC Featherweight Championship of the world.
Holloway very confident on his feet. He's doing a great job of moving, throwing those shots. Another hard shot to the body. Yep. Pettis is in trouble. Holloway pouring it on.
Holloway looking to finish
melting.
it.
It's all over.
Wow! Max Holloway finishes Anthony Pettis.
Outstanding.
After throwing almost 100 strikes in round 3 compared to Anthony's 19 landed, Holloway drowned his opponent, finishing him with hooking body shots that crumbled his resolve. Pettis fell to the canvas absolutely overwhelmed with strikes. Max had, at every single moment, an opportunity within the bout, completely outclassed the former lightweight champion. It looked like Max was on a different level entirely. His strikes were crisp, and he was even attempting and landing takedowns. And as always, his impressive cardio and crazy output was second to none. If it wasn't clear before, it was now. People just simply could not keep up with him inside of the cage, and so it was. Max was the interim featherweight world champion. He stood in the center of the octagon, the lights above the cage directly pointed at him as the belt shimmered, and there he proclaimed in his goofy and entertaining way, "Where is José Aldo?"
Couldn't find Aldo, so I started calling him Waldo. Jose Waldo. Hashtag Jose Waldo.
And that was indeed a good question, because the belt now needed to be unified. Max didn't want to settle for less. He wanted to not only be undisputed, he wanted to be one of the greats, and that could only start with Jose on the other side of the cage.
I think he hasn't fought the top guys in the division. When you look at it, they weren't at the top. The top guys he fought were all tough fights, which went all 3 rounds.
He's a legend, you know, like I've been saying. I watched him when I was 17 years old. I'm 25 now, and I'm facing the guy. You know, that's a long time on top. I look at me like I'm the greatest. You know, that's that. And this ain't cockiness. Everybody's like, oh man, this kid is so cocky. He talks and blah blah blah. I'm like, this is confidence. You guys need to know the difference. You know, cockiness is over here saying wild make-believe shit. You know, I'm saying facts and I'm saying real stuff.
It is one of the biggest nights of the year in sports here in beautiful Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Tonight, the King of Rio and one of Brazil's most beloved athletes and champions, José Aldo Jr. His mission once again is to exit as UFC Featherweight Champion. Third round of a possible 5 here to determine the undisputed UFC Featherweight Champion. Well, immediately following the main event, we will recap all of tonight's action from Rio on the UFC 212 post-fight show. That'll do it! Max Holloway! Max Holloway is the undisputed UFC Featherweight Champion! Hawaii, stand up!
The undisputed UFC featherweight title changes hands once more, its energies transferred to another man bidding to be the best. The crowd of Rio, once deafening in excitement and bloodthirst for their hometown hero, falls quiet. For Holloway, this is it. The belt he had chased for years, now wrapped around his waist. Years of grinding, a long, arduous and testing journey, 11 straight wins, all validated at this moment. The kid from Waianae, Hawaii, proving he belongs at the pinnacle of the sport, and so he ushers in upon his shoulders a new era for the division, the young blood seeking a new story to tell, beating Aldo, a 2-time champ, a divisional GOAT, an MMA icon, on his home turf, surely added to how great this crowning moment was. But whilst the dream becomes reality for one, for the other, agony follows. The dream once dreamt now becomes a memory of what once was. Years of dominance for Jose unraveled not in an instant like that with McGregor, but over the course of many rounds, where he had the chance to turn the tide, but alas could not. There was no excuses this time. There was no one lucky punch. There was no pressure that was too much to handle, or the mind games that went too far. For the first time in his career, Jose would have to stare into the mirror knowing that he was simply outclassed, and yet Aldo's reign, as a legend, isn't erased. The absence of the belt does not leave a void. What has happened will always remain. He defined the featherweight's era, and that can never be taken away. And even still, he has the opportunity to make his way back towards the title, of course, but this late in his career, there were question marks, and the vultures were certainly circling. UFC 212, the night the King of Rio was dethroned in his hometown, and that was a sting that lasted long into the nights ahead. Max was now the third man ever to call himself the UFC Featherweight Champion of the world, which is really quite something when you imagine that the organization had been running since 1996, and it was 2017. The 145ers were late to the game, and Jose had dominated for years. Considering Jose's success at the top, many thought that he might indeed end up in an immediate rematch with Holloway, but I think that the UFC knew that they needed to move on from him for a little bit. He had been in every single title fight since the inception of the division, and so they really wanted some new blood. Well, not exactly. After stringing 2 wins together against top-ranked guys, the ever-durable Frankie Edgar, in the eyes of the UFC, had worked his way back to the title, so him and Max were scheduled to face off against each other at UFC 218, but a little less than a month before the bout, Frankie would unfortunately pull from the matchup citing an injury. The UFC needed a late replacement, and there was one man who thought that he was up for the challenge.
From a fight in the making to a fight that's breaking, former lightweight belt holder Frankie Edgar is out of his featherweight title fight with champion Max Holloway. Edgar is injured, and he will not face Holloway at UFC 218 December 2nd.
Waianae UFC Featherweight Champion Max Blessed Holloway has a rematch on his hands.
They will run it back. It will be Holloway versus Aldo 2.
What better replacement can we have than the former reigning champion in Jose Aldo? The guy was dominant for so many years that, you can't help but be like, all right, let's give you another shot. You've earned it over the years of hard work and dominating performances is at 145, so who knows how it's going to go. Jose's always a risk for anybody when he steps into that octagon.
Trying to survive. His face is a mask of blood. And Holloway all over him.
this thing soon. That'll do it. Max Holloway has defended his undisputed featherweight champion.
The canvas of the octagon played host to an echo of that Aldo that had once built an empire atop the 145ers. Moments of that legend could be seen. The leg kicks, the crisp striking, but it simply was folly. If it wasn't obvious before, it was now. Aldo's prime had slipped away. Holloway's pressure took its toll, and mounting strikes and forward movement of the champ unraveled Jose to his end in the third round, lasting only 40 seconds longer than their first outing, from almost a decade without losing to being finished 3 times out of his last 4. The questions now became, was Aldo's time in this division coming to its most natural and most brutal of endings? And if not for the division, perhaps for the sport entirely? Only time will tell, I guess. For Holloway, a second win against Jose really hammered it home. This was a new era for the sport, a new man to usher in a new chapter, and what better example of a champion was there than the charismatic and chilled out Hawaiian, Max Blessed Holloway. Holloway would continue his reign over the division by taking on Brian Ortega in one of the most legendary fights of all time. The next expected contender after this fight had also made themselves known, a man fighting out of Australia. He had his own equally legendary run in MMA, 19-1, across multiple divisions, now including a 5-fight winning streak at featherweight, involving some of the best the UFC had to offer. Names such as Chad Mendes and Darren Elkins on his resume. Alexander Volkanovski was staring down the barrel of a title shot. The UFC had other plans though. Max Holloway would ultimately take on Dustin Poirier in a bid for a second title, and that left 2 men in the division looking to be next in line. The other man, besides Alex Volkanovski, was José Aldo, who after losing to Max the second time, had proven to be an immovable object in the division. He had re-cemented his position since his second loss to Max by knocking out Renato Moicano and Jeremy Stevens in back-to-back performances of the night. Although it was only 1 fight per year, it proved that Jose wasn't about to be one of those fighters who, after falling short of the peak of their career, was willing to settle for gimmick fights and consolation prizes. No, instead he was willing to take on the best the division had to offer, and so now the UFC saw their opportunity, a title eliminator fight to take place just 1 month after Holloway's excursion to a heavier weight class. This was it. This was Aldo's moment to secure a rare opportunity for a third fight against a man who had beaten him twice. A 2-year pilgrimage back towards the title.
A big one ahead, fighting at Rio UFC 237. Looking forward to this one. It's a big one, Aldo, Jose Aldo, such a big fight, such a big name. It's a really important fight for me, and I can't wait to go out there and do my thing.
I think every fight I do in there is very important, but this is, I guess you could call it a turning point. I'm really hungry and I want to win it because of that, because I have this entire path planned out in my head.
Aldo's still Aldo. He's still a very dangerous fighter, very explosive. He always was. He was even dangerous with Max. But, people, you're always going to, if he loses, he had an off day. But, styles make fights. Max puts the pressure on. Max had good footwork, and I think he found a few holes in Aldo's game.
I think so. I think when you're a champion, everyone says you're the best in the world. But when you lose, they don't even look at the quality of your opponent, but the way that you lost. Not only did they underestimate me, they said it was the end for me, that my career was over, that I only serve as a ladder to others, but not me. I knew I was going to lose one day. Loss is a part of an athlete's career, not just in MMA. So I had to learn from it and deal with it.
I'm the only one who has a clear run at the title, really, undefeated, taking out all the top guys, taking out number 1 guy. The only guy that beat Aldo that's there is Max Holloway, the champ, you know what I mean? So, but letting me fight Aldo, I go out and win, sorry Frank, but I'm ahead. My undefeated run's going to go, and it's just going to continue, because you're not going to get the same Alex Volkanovski you've seen last fight. I'm going to be a level up again. As you said, the King of Rio, the greatest featherweight of all time. It's just a huge win for me. But it's just 30-27 over a legend like that is just unreal. And we all know what I want next. And I want that title.
Since joining the WEC back in 2008, José Aldo had only ever lost to two men, two champions, two greats. May 11th, 2019 would mark the day that the man often described as the greatest featherweight of all time would lose to a ranked contender rather than a man with a belt. Little did we know the fighter that Alex would go on to become, a man who would also challenge for the title of the greatest featherweight of all time. It was that day that also marked the last time that we would ever see Aldo fight at 145 pounds ever again. His time ruling and haunting that division had come to a dramatic end, his legacy fuel for Alexander to continue his ascent, and in a way, I guess that marks how truly incredible Jose is. When people validate UFC reigns in the featherweight division, it lives and dies as to whether you had beaten the Brazilian or not. Max would never be considered a legend if he hadn't done what he had done to Jose twice. McGregor would never have rocketed into the stratosphere of popularity if he hadn't have done what he had done to any other man than Aldo. Their stories are built off of a man who struggled to escape the favelas and managed to climb valiantly to the top of the world. And not only did he stay there, he dominated, undefeated for all but a decade, and now, the twilight of his career had fallen upon him. He would be unceremoniously kicked out of the division that he had called his own, and after the loss to Alexander Volkanovski in May of 2019, Jose would make his intentions to move down in weight to bantamweight known to the world. It was a pretty remarkable idea. Many had expected him to move up in weight, especially because he had been linked to so many fights in the lightweight division, and yet here he was, wanting to shed precious pounds off of his already lean physique. Dana White had been pretty much dead set against the idea, his point being that fighters go up in weight towards the end of their career, not down. And not only that, Aldo had been touted many times as a lightweight threat during his featherweight tenure, having many super fights put across his desk. But the Brazilian had managed to convince the UFC president by starting a propaganda war, sending photos to Dana's personal phone of himself looking shredded, yet healthy, of which he was standing on a scale dropping down in weight over the course of a couple of months. Dana would finally relent towards the end of 2019 and would give Jose a fantastic opportunity by squaring off against a man who had just fallen short in the Bantamweight title fight against Henry Cejudo, and that was Marlon Moraes, who himself was looking for a quick comeback fight. Marlon had paved his career in the World Series of Fighting, known as the PFL now, where he had gone on an impressive title reign before coming over to the UFC, where before losing to Henry, he had been on a 4-fight winning streak, including 3 performances of the night. Now ranked number 1 in the division, Jose had an extremely tough matchup in front of him. The pair would be scheduled to scrap it out in December of 2019, Jose rebounding quickly after his loss to Volk. But Jose would rather unfortunately lose in an extremely close and rather controversial split decision. It was one of those rare moments where Dana just outright stated that he thought the loser had won the fight. Fans thought he had won, the media thought Jose had won, hell, even Marlon Moraes had thought he had won.
Udo says, I want Aldo. If he says, I want Jose Aldo to win, I mean, how many people in here think Jose Aldo won the fight? Most of the room thinks that Jose Aldo won the fight. If that's what he wants to do next, we could do it. I don't have a problem with it.
And Dana was about to be a man of principle. Dana literally said, fuck these judges, I'm giving Jose the next title shot. And so in February of 2020, Jose would be confirmed as the man to take on Henry Cejudo in a fight to take place at UFC 249. But then, well, the world quickly fell apart.
China has identified the cause of the mysterious new virus. Coronavirus.
There are fears a rapidly spreading virus has reached Australia.
This is a rapidly emerging situation.
We've been closely monitoring the situation with the coronavirus and its potential impact on the health and safety of UFC athletes, staff, and fans around the world. We're moving forward with all our UFC live events.
Despite Jose being promised the matchup for the title, due to the circumstances surrounding the pandemic, Jose would be unable to fly, and therefore unable to compete for the title. And so, as we know, at UFC 249, Dominic Cruz instead would step in to fight Henry.
Dominic Cruz makes his return to the octagon in a bantamweight battle for the belt against Henry Cejudo Saturday at UFC 249.
And he would be finished inside 2 rounds. In the post-fight interview of that fight, Henry would retire from the sport, vacating his title and leaving the sport indefinitely. The UFC, sensing that Henry was playing a game in order to increase his pay, would move on rather quickly. They wanted to fill the title as quickly as humanly possible. The A-side for this vacant title was obvious: Petr Yan, a man out of the freezing wasteland of Siberia who had more than earned his shot at gold, riding a spectacular 9-fight winning streak that included the likes of bantamweight vet and retired skateboarder Uriah Faber and the hard-hitting Jimmy Rivera. Many had likened Yan to a machine, one who downloads his opponent's information mid-fight, creating the perfect offenses, and then turns into a tidal wave of onslaught as the rounds progress. I'm pretty sure the Weasel used to just call him the Terminator, and you know, it was a nickname that kind of just fit. He was a consummate martial artist, and one hailed as the next generation of perfect fighter. The question was, who would be his dance partner? Well, it was the man who had missed out on his title shot previously, the King of Rio, José Aldo. It was a weird time in the sport, to say the least. It truly felt like a new beginning of sorts. Petr Yan, the new guard moving in, and a legend of a higher weight class in José, looking to create a new legacy. The vacant title was on the line, and whoever could grasp it would start a new era for the division.
One way or another, at the end of this one, the Bantamweight title will no longer be vacant. The Russian boxer Petr Yan, at 27 years old, he has arrived at his first UFC title fight. Former sparring partners turned championship foes with an embrace here.
Ladies and gentlemen, at 3 minutes, 24 seconds of the 5th round, referee Leon Roberts has called a stop to this contest, declaring the winner by TKO and
Over the course of 5 rounds, Petr Yan would technically outstrike and clinch the Brazilian, eventually wilting him in the 5th round. As the former featherweight champ succumbed to punches, it marked for the first time in his career a 3-fight losing streak, and at the time, many had felt that perhaps for this grizzled vet, he should probably fade out of the sport and hang up his gloves. But one of those things I always loved about José was his tenacity, his unrelenting drive, and his unwillingness to allow setbacks to define his career. Just 5 months later, he was back, setting a pattern of consistent comebacks, where most men in this game take well up to a year to recover and refocus after losses at pivotal junctures in their fighting legacy. José, however, was built different. He would remain at bantamweight, and the UFC, never ones to give Aldo an easy route back to a winning streak, would feed him a man who had most recently just snapped the UFC's greatest prospect's tiny leg. Sugar Show cried into his ankle, whilst Aldo jumped at the opportunity to snatch the momentum of a bantamweight on the rise.
Unanimous decision, José Aldo Jr.
Aldo would go on to shut down the 15th ranked bantamweight in the world, a shutout, dominating him over the course of 3 rounds, and making it known to the rest of the division that he was here to stay despite losing on paper in his first 2 fights at 135 pounds. Despite age, Aldo looked better than ever, and now he needed to further the point by taking on another set of opponents that would put him back on track to a title fight. This would come in the form of 2 perfect performances against the bantamweight's best. First, Pedro Munoz would fall victim to José's veteran skills, and then it was Rob Font who would be dismantled in a 5-round main event. Respectfully, Aldo had dispatched the 9th ranked and 4th ranked contender in the world at bantamweight. It really did seem that he was just 1 fight away from a title shot. Around this time, the division had been pretty jammed up as bantamweight had become a pretty stacked division. Aljo had also clogged things up with his initially shaky acceptance of the world title. This meant that Corey Sandhagen had been shot up the ranks. TJ Dillashaw had also come back, and rumours of Henry Cejudo making a comeback were all on the horizon. Sean O'Malley was on the rise, and somehow Petr Yan was out of the title picture. To be honest, it was a great time to be a fan of the sport, and in particular a fan of the bantamweights. That left a few people to just kind of hang around and scrap it out, trying to figure out some kind of order in the rankings. With many people deserving of a title shot, many fans wanted to see Aldo return to the title picture, and even Aljo fancied José's name on his resume, and so a fight was set up with another man equally deserving of a title shot, and that was a man that many know well now, but at the time had made a name for being a little bit boring and uninspired. I'm of course talking about Merab. It was a great matchup for the UFC to make, to be honest. If Aldo won, then he would guarantee himself a title shot against Aljo. If Merab won, then hopefully he could turn fans to his favour and get some popularity. But despite the UFC's best intentions, that isn't exactly what we got.
Ladies and gentlemen, after 3 rounds, we go to the judges' scorecards. The judges score the contest 29-28, 29-28, and 30-27 for the winner by unanimous decision,
Merab, what a performance. He wins 2-1. Good shit, man. Ruined Aldo's career. At least you go down to flyweight now so you don't have to fight your friend for the belt. Thank God for that. Get off the cage, you mess. You should be in a cage.
It was one of the most disappointing and frustrating fights in recent memory for anyone who loves Jose. Merab did exactly what everyone feared he would do. He turned the entire fight into a 15-minute wrestling clinch fest. From the midpoint of round 1 onward, he basically glued himself to Aldo, drove him to the cage and just held him there. The scorecards were inevitable, 30-27 across all 3 judges, and the internet was pissed to say the least. Many called it heartbreaking and a whimper for Aldo's career, lamenting how Merab's wall and stall strategy neutralized any excitement. Many just said Merab was humping him against the cage. Overall, it left Aldo fans feeling robbed of a proper send-off, and people were right. Merab had essentially pushed Aldo into retirement off the back of one of the most frustrating and boring performances we had probably seen out of Jose. On the 18th of September 2022, the same day as the birth of his son, it was announced that Aldo had retired from MMA, with 1 fight remaining on his UFC contract. Despite the initial reports, Aldo remained under contract with the UFC, but was granted permission to pursue opportunities in other sports, and that's exactly what we would get out of him. Despite leaving the octagon in the rearview mirror, we would actually get 6 months of Aldo destroying men in boxing matches. After 3 pretty exciting boxing matches over the course of half a year, many people were excited of what Aldo was capable of in this sport, yet he turned to silence in the middle part of the year. Maybe he just wanted to watch his children grow old, or maybe he really had just retired. And so it was in the summer of 2023 that Aldo would be officially entered into the UFC Hall of Fame, an extremely prestigious placement in a very exclusive club. His career more than deserved the accolade, a legacy of violence, now capped with the iconic gold statue for one of the most baddest men on the planet. The seasons came and went, and as the snow melted at the turn of the new year of 2024, a very odd announcement was made. After UFC 300 kind of stripped the roster bare, using up all of the premier organization's star power, the very next UFC event looked kinda sparse. You know it's a bad day for the company when they are headlining a pay-per-view with Pantoja, no offense, and it was their Rio de Janeiro event, which is always built up to be a bit of a banger, except this time, they needed something big for the co-main event, and well, there was one obvious choice, the King of Rio himself, José Aldo Jr. That's right, Aldo, now a UFC Hall of Famer, was making his comeback to the sport, and the company wasn't about to give him an easy ride. Aldo's opponent would be entering the octagon in enemy territory, riding a 6-fight winning streak that had placed him ranked number 14th in the world. Jonathan Martinez was a tough opponent to say the least, so Aldo had his work cut out for him. The 3-rounder was a striking clinic, with Aldo outclassing Martinez on the feet while stuffing takedown attempts in classic Aldo style. In the final round, the crowd erupted as Aldo turned on his vintage mode, swarming with combinations and a brutal knee to the body that buckled Martinez. He poured on leg kicks and a late flurry of punches, nearly dropping Martinez with a left hook. This was Aldo's most dominant performance in a while, sealing the performance with shutout scores, 30-27, a retirement return for the ages. Aldo celebrated with the Brazilian fans, calling it potentially his UFC swan song, but leaving the door open for more. With a crown upon his head, standing in the octagon in the heart of Rio, many called it one of the most perfect moments the sport could offer, but as we know, mixed martial arts doesn't provide happy endings. Over the next year, Aldo would fight 2 more times, ultimately losing both of them. Whilst he was afforded the opportunity to exit the cage without being knocked out or submitted, like most legends who decline in this sport, he still let that opportunity of the perfect bow tie that was the Martinez fight fall by the wayside. Instead, Aldo's career fizzled out in an anticlimactic crescendo, but all things considered, I'd rather see that than to see him forcibly rejected by this most callous and vicious of games. Aldo's career ended with a record of 32 wins and 10 losses, but those losses do not paint the tapestry that he left behind. One by one they fell, men seeking to take everything from Jose, men who had equal stories of pain, sacrifice, and self-perceived destined greatness, but their hopes were dashed upon the rocks of a humble man out of the favelas. How strange it is that a man who once dreamed of seeing the ocean for the first time, the salt-dashed shores, and the overwhelming hum of a city, would eventually be proclaimed the king of it. I said at the start of this video that I would answer the question of what happens after it all ends. Well, this is the answer. At the end of it all, Aldo is the King of Rio, a man idolized by his home nation. There is a story we hear too often, men who become champions, finally reaching the pinnacle of the sport, and then they falter. It's the end of a journey of sorts, lifting that belt of gold and leather above their heads. That fixation on what they perceive as the ultimate goal has nowhere to go after, and we see time and time again champions spit out the other side of ambition. But Jose was different. As a featherweight, he had never lost. Over 10 years of unrivaled dominance, many championship title wins, already discussed as not only a pound-for-pound great, but as a future Hall of Famer, a rare and exclusive club reserved only for truly the most prestigious athletes of combat. And yet, when he did fall at featherweight, a bantamweight legacy ensued, and he did get that Hall of Fame accolade. Asked how he maintained such drive and passion for the sport as those hungry and ambitious men challenging him, those men who had not tasted what Aldo had achieved many times over, he simply said, "I keep dreaming like them." He would later clarify what he was really fighting for, and it wasn't trinkets or accolades, it was something much deeper, much more important: family. He would say, when you leave your family and friends and everybody behind, and you start to look to do something to build your dream, it's really a shot in the dark. We wanted to improve our lives somehow, and help our family and our parents, and that's not only my dream, but the dream of everybody else in this game. In his naivety, Aldo perceived what he thought was a universal desire pushing all men to achieve greatness, a simple goal to save one's family, but perhaps he missed the shadow lurking beneath, the selfish hunger that drives men. The fact is, it's only a soul raised beneath a zinc roof, with nothing but a soccer ball to call his own, that can channel such desperation into one of the most awe-inspiring runs to the top of this featherweight mountain, a pursuit that saved his family, and yet he still dreams of more. He still feels that hunger that haunted his childhood. It's a circumstance so few will ever truly understand or appreciate. That was Jose's naivety. He thought all those that faced him were pursuing the same ends from the same beginnings, but that simply is not the case. Ego, hopes, dreams, money, fame, faith, and love, these ethereal forces propel men to greatness, yet inside the octagon, they always dissolve. On the coarse canvas, there is only your opponent. On the logo-ridden mat, under the brightest lights, only truth can be found. For Jose, in that honesty, he would find greatness, and for a decade, there was seemingly no end to his reign. Too dominant, too skilled, too driven, but ultimately, all things must come to an end, and I guess in a way, time stills all. It robs us of things we covet most. That fixation of what comes next sees years fall by the wayside. What seems like permanence is simply a fleeting illusion. We rage against it, but eventually one and all capitulate to the universe's will. What remains after we are gone is our legacy, and many men will fall short of what Aldo has done for this sport.